Oi, Free League. John really likes this book.
Hey love, have you been on my computer? Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this RPG review I'm going to be looking at Things from the Flood by Free League Games, distributed by Modiphius. Free League have kindly sent me a hard copy of Things from the Flood. It's a 200 plus page full colour book that costs £35.99, that's British money, from distributors Modiphius. It's also available as a full colour PDF from Drivethru RPG for £19.68 GBP. So, to summarise, Things from the Flood is Swedish role-playing company Free League's second foray into the world they have woven around the beautiful artwork of Simon Stallenhag. If you haven't seen any of his artwork yet, do yourself a favour and Google him. I'll pepper some throughout this video, and his artwork shows typical scenes of people in fields, farms, petrol stations and the like, all sort of common scenes, but all with a weird sort of sci-fi twist to them, you know, robots walking through the field, high-tech power stations looming behind the farm, that sort of thing. The strange organic looking technology in it reminds me a little bit of Geiger's work, but in a way that's more fully grounded in what we would ostensibly call the real world. But we're not here just to discuss the artwork, although you'll be pleased to know there's a plethora of beautiful imagery scattered throughout the book, giving it a strong visual identity. In the Tales from the Loop universe, two particle accelerators were built in the 1950s, one in America and the other in Sweden. This led to the discovery of various new technologies such as robotics and the great slow-moving magnetrine cargo ships. However, much of this technology was not in everyday use, leading to a strange golden age in the 80s that would look 99% familiar to people from the real world, with just maybe a 1% skew. Tales from the Loop, the first game in this universe, portrayed an optimistic 1980s where the players took control of children attempting to make their way in this strange world full of wonder and potential. In Tales from the Flood, we have entered the 90s and things have started to go wrong. Corporate greed has started to overtake optimism. The particle accelerators are flooded with mutating brown water from somewhere unknown, and the great magnetrine fleets sit rusting away to nothing. Even robots and previously reliable technology have been infected by a strange machine cancer, causing bony and fleshy growths to sprout from them. Into this seemingly failing world come the player characters, now teenagers struggling to process the changes that are occurring both in the outside world and inside themselves. Now, if you've not seen any of my video reviews before, the way it works is that I rate a book based on 4 categories and discuss my reasons for the ratings that I've given. And these 4 categories are writing, the look of the book, the system, and the background. Each of these ratings gets either a plus, a minus, or a blank, depending on whether I feel it's good, bad, or just okay. At the end, I add up these 4 ratings to see what overall rating the game gets on the trusty fate ladder that you can see there. So, for the writing, I'm going to give this game a plus. I very much enjoyed the writing style affected in the book. It chips along at a brisk conversational pace, but never dips into excess rambling or loses its way. Each chapter begins with a beautiful piece of artwork and a short bit of flavour text, giving texture and colour to an associated bit of the game world, without, I'm pleased to say, ever reaching excesses of purple prose, nor forgetting that this is a game meant to be played, not a vehicle for the author's fan fiction. Things from the Flood maintains a great balance, walking that fine line between the necessary system explanations and flavourful fictions expertly. It's a tricky thing to do, and I'm pleased to see the authors have a masterful grasp of this. One of the things I found particularly gratifying is the excellent use of gameplay examples throughout the book. Now, I've got to confess that I often skip these in books because, well, I know how to play RPGs and I often find them quite dry reading. Free League not only manages to make these examples interesting, but they also use them to subtly convey a lot about how they believe the game should be played, and to infuse more background content that other creators would have no doubt relied upon pages and pages of in-game fiction to accomplish the same ends. The writers set out 6 principles of how the game is to be played at the start of the book, and these are: 1. Everything changes, everything falls apart. 2. Everyday life is full of demands, boredom and conflict. 3. The mysteries are exciting but dangerous and only you can stop them. 4. You are neither kids nor fully adults. 5. The game is played scene by scene. And 6. The world is described collaboratively. I admire the fact that the authors are confident enough to put up in black and white how they believe the game should be played. It's something I would recommend prospective RPG authors to do. Don't leave people to fumble around and try and interpret what the designer visualizes for the game, like some sort of crazed oracle trying to divine the future from the blood and wire guts of a raven drone. Sure, the players might ignore your ideas if you put them up there, but at least you've given them that choice from the get-go. Okay, so we move on to the look of the book, and I'm sure you won't be surprised that I've given it a plus. As I'm sure you've guessed, I'm a big fan of Simon Stalenhag's work, although as a recovering angsty World of Darkness player, the optimism of the previous game is a little alien to me. And given that I was born in 1980, I only vaguely remember the 80s. Not only do I remember the 1990s, allowing the game to sort of tweak that nostalgia vein, but also the dark and crumbling world depicted in the artwork of the book really appeals to me. The front cover shows a group of 5 teenagers stood on a snow-covered road or track. Seen from behind, our viewpoint is that of the teens as they look up at a huge, lumbering, dark robot covered in blood-red lights and trailing metallic tentacles. The muted colour scheme used on the cover is something that carries throughout the rest of the book, with a prominent colour palette of deep burgundies, dull blues and rusty ochres. Even the colours chosen reinforce this slightly off-kilter, decaying nature of the world that our teen player characters find themselves in. So for the system, I'm also giving the game a plus. I'm just going to go on record right now and say that I really love the system used in this game and that of its predecessor, Tales from the Loop. It has an elegant simplicity that seems to take inspiration from a number of other games and forges them together to make something that works extremely well for this game. Having played in a few sessions of Tales from the Loop, run by Lloyd Jan, I can honestly say I found the system moved along rapidly and yet provided more than enough options, in my opinion, for the style of game covered. You begin by creating your PC, or teen as the game refers to them. This has tinges of sort of apocalypse world and begins with you choosing an archetypal teenager such as the hacker, the jock, lone wolf, motorhead, etc, etc. And each type has a full page write-up highlighting the choices available for that particular character. Players distribute points between attributes, 1 to 5 in each, and 10 points between various skills. They choose an iconic item for their playbook, pick a problem, a drive, and a shame. In order to overcome an obstacle when dice rolling is required, players assemble a pool of d6s based on the relevant attribute and skill level. Any 6s that are rolled count as a success. Most challenges require only a single success, but extra ones can be used to further improve the situation for the player characters. There are various ways that this pool can be grown further, either by assistance from other teens or through using items. As you might expect, given that the game's protagonists are teenagers, they are chock full of insecurities, issues and problems that, to them, are fully as important as the things occurring on a larger stage. Now please note I'm not trying to patronise teenagers in this part of the review. It might be a long time, over 15 years or so, since I've been a teenager, but I remember feeling confused about my place in the world, scared of things that seemed so incomprehensibly massive going on around me, and becoming aware that both myself and the world were changing, and not always for the better. It might sound a bit angsty.
Recovering World of Darkness player, remember?
For me to dwell on this, but Things from the Flood really tapped into the dichotomy of the teenage condition for me. The protagonists of the game are full of shame, confusion and doubt, seemingly weak and insignificant against the world-shattering events that are occurring around them. But when they come together as a group to support and help each other, they have a strength that enables them to move mountains and shake the very heavens themselves. I think that, aside from the nostalgia factor, that's one of the reasons TV shows like Stranger Things, look, you knew it was going to get mentioned sooner or later in this review, right? And games like Things from the Flood appealed to us. We can all remember times when we were younger and felt powerless to act against events occurring around us. Sometimes we had the strength to make ourselves heard, but not all of us and not always. These TV series and RPGs give us a chance to relive those times, face those challenges, albeit normally writ large with a supernatural or other spin, and cheer on the young heroes as they fight back with the strength that perhaps we ourselves never possessed in our own youth. The source of a teen's strength, their support mechanism, if you will, is represented in the game by their relationship with the other teens, hooks that link them to the plots occurring, and most of all, their anchor. An anchor is a person that the teen can go to for support, comfort and care in times of need, and it's a particularly cool way of dealing with injuries and character death. Unlike Tales from the Flood, where your young characters could not die, death and injury are back on the table for the teens of Things from the Flood. If you fail to overcome a trouble or a test, then you may be forced to take a condition, imposing a dice penalty on future rolls. 4 of the conditions, upset, scared, exhausted and injured, are minor and can be recovered from between adventures by spending time with your anchor. If you've already taken 4 minor conditions and you receive a 5th, then you are broken, automatically failing further dice rolls until you're healed. Each time you become broken, your character is permanently scarred, either mentally or physically. Each time you receive a scar, you must roll 1d6. If you cannot roll more than the number of scars you have, then your character is no longer playable, and the player must choose one of the following, depending on the situation. The teen dies instantly, the teen becomes gravely injured and dies in a hospital, the teen vanishes without a trace, the teen lives but is so affected by trauma that her parents elect to move away, or the teen is taken into custody by the authorities and placed in a foster home. Either way, your teen is out of the game. If the teen dies near the end of the game, the GM may elect to allow the PC to have a farewell scene in the aftermath segment of a session. And I think this is a nice way of sort of upping the threat level a bit from Tales from the Loop, while still allowing it to have like a meaningful story impact with some player choice in there, which I kind of like. Not for all games, but I think certainly for this game, it really suits the flavour of it. Speaking of mysteries, though, Things from the Flood does not just leave you to work out how to run a typical session of the game for yourself, it provides a framework for running mysteries. Essentially, the creation of a mystery follows this format. First of all, you create the truth behind the mystery, typically framed as a conflict between 2 or more groups. Next, you cover the mystery and everyday life. Fantastic scenes in the game should be interspersed with scenes of everyday life. I mean, after all, the player characters are normal kids for the most part. The writers encourage the GM to create these collaboratively with the players, asking them what sort of everyday life scene they'd like and what they'd like to portray. Next, we have introducing the teens. Each of them plays out an everyday scene in order to get everyone to know the characters and get a bit more of an insight. We then have introducing the mystery. The teens encounter or hear about something that leads them to group together and investigate the mystery. We then have the investigation phase, where the teens visit locations, interact with NPCs, etc., and slowly start to piece together some of the truth behind the mystery. We then have the confrontation phase, which is the climax of the game, where the teens confront the villain or unravel the mystery. And finally, we have the aftermath. Life moves on. Each team gets to play out an everyday life scene afterwards to reflect how they may have changed, or not, as the case may be. We then move on to the background of the game, and again I'm going to give this a plus. In case you haven't guessed by now, I'm a massive fan of this book, and in particular the world that it strives to create. The artwork used is evocative, seeming at once familiar and yet strange. This even carries forward to the smaller pieces of art, including a number of common items that have sprouted strange biological looking growths. Ever since I first picked up a World of Darkness game in the 90s, appropriately enough, I've had a soft spot for games that are run in world that are like ours, but with some subtle, or not so subtle depending on the game, differences. However, it can be difficult to do such worlds well. having to explain how the world continued to develop in a manner consistent with the real world, whilst also having elements not present in the real world. A lot of games cope with this by having some manner of secrecy pact preserved by its alien or supernatural residents, somewhat isolating the additional elements from the rest of the world. This isn't really an option with things from the Flood, where strange technologies have been discovered and rusty mind-addled robots stumble through fields in cordoned-off hazard zones. Somehow the authors of Things from the Flood managed to make it seem plausible though, particularly in this game where the problems inherent in many of these new technologies have only just come to light and the promises of a once golden future have begun to rot and decay. The book gives us a brief timeline showing where it varies from real world history, and also, as if giving us comprehensive game creation guidelines wasn't enough, gives us a complete mystery framework at the back of the book. It's a cool concept, and one which the authors of the book portray expertly as they weave tales about a game world that, if you squint a little, looks very much like our own. So, looking at the overall rating, we can see that Things from the Flood by Free League gets a great rating, and I have no hesitation in giving the book that rating. It's a game that focuses on a specific time and setting and implements that well, using mechanics to reinforce the idea that you are teens exploring changes within yourself and the world around you. If you're familiar with my recent podcast episode, you'll have heard me saying that, in general, I'm not a fan of games that have a specific setting baked into them, with a rule system that can't easily be extracted and used to run other games. Now, that's quite true. However, Things from the Flood does such an excellent job of portraying its setting and really hammering it home with Stalin Hagg's excellent artwork that I found myself getting excited about the setting even before I'd opened the book. The excellent production values and carefully crafted written and visual elements of the book all work together to create a thoroughly compelling world that I, for one, can't wait to explore more. Plus, I think, to be honest, you could probably extract the system from this game without too much difficulty. If you've still got that Stranger Things nostalgia kick, you fancy struggling with teen dilemmas, or you just fancy throwing yourself into a strange, near-Earth, spiralling down in an uncomfortably familiar arc of destruction, then you should definitely do yourself a favour and pick yourself up a copy of this book. It's not the cheapest RPG available, even the PDF's a little bit pricey in my opinion, but the high production values and compelling game make it very worthwhile. I highly recommend it. So there you are, that's my review of Things from the Flood by Free League Games, distributed by Modiphius. I'll put some links to where you can find the PDF or where you can buy the hard copy book. And as I say, if you've got any interest at all in this kind of setting, I really do recommend you've given it a go. I hope you've enjoyed this review. You'll consider clicking on like and subscribing to us on YouTube. You can also click on the bell icon to get notifications when I put out more videos. So until I see you next time, whatever games you're playing, take care, have fun, enjoy yourselves.